Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. Welcome to this episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn. I am absolutely delighted to have in our virtual studio today, Robert White. Robert is a mentor to entrepreneurs, to executives. He's a speaker, a best-selling author, and leadership educator who focuses on integrating a heart-centered, result-oriented, and transformational leadership approach to be more effective. So I know our conversation with Robert is going to be of great interest to everyone in the listening audience because we can compare and contrast and think about and expand upon the ideas of authentic leadership and transformational leadership. I think the way that most people describe Robert is as a transformational architect. I want to dig into that right away with Robert. So without further ado, I'm going to say welcome, Robert, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us about who you are. And thank you, Robert.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you this morning. It's an old line, but with that kind of an introduction, I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say.
That's great.
But I have a lifetime of founding and leading these high-impact experiential learning companies like LifeSpring and ARC International with 1,300,000 graduates. That's my, main claim to fame is being the entrepreneur behind that. Along the way, I learned slowly at first, and then more rapidly about the real essence of our work, about shifting people's perspective, not just some kind of effort at change, but doing the deep work that it takes to get people in touch with their purpose, their vision, their values, and then acting on that out in the world, which of course has a huge impact on your subject of being authentic in our leadership efforts.
Now, everyone will be able to find out so much more about Robert White when you visit his website at therobertwhite.com. And I love the use of the article in front of the name, therobertwhite.com. And you'll be able to find it out in the show notes and be able to find other ways to connect with Robert through LinkedIn or directly through his website at therobertwhite.com. But let me tell you some things about Robert that he may not reveal readily or easily, but you'll be able to discover more on the robertwhite.com website. He was raised in poverty with a lot of physical and emotional abuse. He dropped out of college after one semester as a result of suffering the first of 3 heart attacks. And as Robert, you just described, you went on to lead the high impact learning and development, experiential learning company, and lives in Colorado at this point. But Robert, tell us about how those early experiences and that trauma affected your understanding of leadership and what led you to working as a transformation architect.
I think a place to start in kind of a very long story, Mike, is at 27, I was broke. I had a little sales company that was struggling. We were paying salaries late, that kind of struggle. I had been divorced. I felt horribly guilty about it. And I was still having the daily chest pain, and I was told that I would die by 35, which was a heavier burden on me than I realized at the time. In terms of how I held myself, I had some ability that had manifested itself in my teenage years, and you and I offline had mentioned that I had this experience in radio. When I was 17, so 10 years before that, where I'm starting this story, I had the highest rated radio show in the state of Wisconsin and made more money than my father had ever made. Was named most likely to succeed by my high school graduating class, and all kinds of plaudits. But then I went off and proved to my high school classmates that they were wrong for about 10 years. I just messed up my life horribly. And friends went out to California. I was living in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and attended one of the early human potential movement trainings, public trainings, called Mind Dynamics. And they came back and they raved about it. And the more I heard about it, the more I didn't want to go. It sounded pretty crazy to me. And, those crazy California people do stuff like that. But I don't want to do it. And 6 months later, I saw the progress in their lives, these two guys, my friends who were graduates. So I grudgingly went to the training, and it's a cliche all these years later, but it changed my life for the better. And what I realized is that I was playing the victim in life, and I really, at a very deep level, got personal responsibility. And I got that I was destroying the very relationships that I needed to succeed in life, whether that be in an intimate relationship or in my leadership role in my little company, or even just with my friends. And it was an incredible breakthrough for me that I stumbled through. It wasn't like I walked out of that training and everything became rosy, but it tripled my income the year after that training, even though in that training they don't mention money even one time or business. And it went up 10 times the following year. And that led me to selling that company, going to New York City and becoming a contract sales trainer, and going from managing 30 people to managing 850. So I could no longer do interviews every day. I started doing weekend seminars for these people and bringing in the Mind Dynamics instructor from New York to talk about that work. And between the two of us, we enrolled over 400 people in the Mind Dynamics training. I didn't know anything about Mind Dynamics except that it worked for me and for the people that I sent there. And one day, the president of Mind Dynamics phoned me, not president, chairman, and I didn't even know his name. He had to introduce himself. It was kind of embarrassing after the fact. And he invited me out to California, and 10 days later, I was president of Mind Dynamics. So I did have 4 years of working for someone else. I ran the business side of his company. But 2 years into that, I also went through the trainer training, which was an incredibly deep and rewarding experience. And in talking about authenticity, I could come back to that event in my life because I witnessed a man who was authentic beyond any description that I had ever had before, and in a deep way. 2-week intensive with him was a really positive change for my life. So that's kind of how it all happened, is that I woke up and I realized that I whether God-given or the moon or the stars or whatever way you want to explain it, I had these abilities that I was ignoring or suppressing, or certainly not expressing into the world. And so it hasn't always been a smooth road, but that's kind of the basis of it all. Was that I figured out that I'm here, I have a purpose, and when I'm authentically expressing it, very, very good things can happen in my life.
That's amazing. I grew up on the gentler side, or the tamer side of the human potential movement, at NTL and Bethel, Maine, and all the experiences there about being able to express yourself in a way that was true to your values and true to who you are. And one of the things that we discuss or describe, or I work with my clients on in authentic leadership, is the notion of trust and how trust underpins most of our successful relationships. And you describe a lot about truth telling. And I'd like to understand that. What does it mean to tell the truth? And can you tell the truth about everything if you're an executive in an organization? How do you come to wrestle with this concept of truth telling as a crucial leadership quality?
Out of the University of Minnesota years ago, there were some studies done around trust. And the frame that I put it in is that if what I'm about is fostering leadership, which is what I'm about, that the basis of leadership is good relationships, because leadership is about creating something new, about an interruption. And when you have that kind of a need, that you have a vision for the future that's different than your current reality, you're going to interrupt some attitudes and habits and behaviors. Well, what do you do next? Let's just say you have that awareness. What do you do next? Well, you go talk to somebody, because you have to enroll people in your world in that vision, in that shift, in that interruption. And so it's all about relationships. Well, what's the basic component of a relationship is, in fact, trust. You don't have a good relationship with someone you don't trust. It's as simple as that. And any increase in trust increases the relationship, deepens the relationship. So these people in Minnesota, the academics, studied this, and they said, well, what are the components that build trust? And they came up with this series of, I'll trust you if, and then, complete that sentence. I'll trust you if you're open and honest with me. I'll trust you if you do what you say you're going to do. There's one that's very unfair. I'll trust you if you are who I expect you to be, which is a real trap for leaders when people put you into that role if you're unaware of it. If you're aware of it, you can do something about it. But so those components, to me, is how I look at trust. And when it comes to that open and honest piece, we are trained from infancy almost to be less than honest. And being socially correct creates that pattern. So for many of us, we're not even aware of the little lies that we tell and how they diminish trust in those around us. I've lived and worked abroad for 23 years of my working life. And while I was living in Japan, one of our escapes was Hawaii. And part of that routine, our home was on Maui, on the out island. But we would go to Honolulu for shopping before we returned to Japan. So we're in one of these very tall apartment buildings, a very nice suite. And my daughter Megan at that time was 2.5 or 3 years old, going on 35. That's just she's
that
always
was the reality.
Yes, and mouthy. I hope she's not listening to this. Let us say she was articulate, even at a very young age. And so I'm taking Megan to the pool, and we're on like the 30th floor. And you've got your swimming suit on, a little cover up, and you're in the elevator, and the door opens about floor 25, and a lady gets on, and Megan right now she's 4'11", 4 feet 11 inches tall. She's tiny. She was even tinier, of course, at, let's say, 3 years old. And so this woman gets on, and she's wearing her swimming suit and a cover up that extends down to her, her hips. So if you think about this, what is Megan looking at? She's looking right at this woman's legs. And she tugs on my arm, and in a very, very loud and very clear voice says, "Daddy, this lady has blue lines on her legs."
Uh-huh.
Varicose veins, right? So I do the dad thing. Yes, Megan. Okay, okay. And then Megan says very clearly, "Daddy, it looks like your highway map." the blue lines. And
Yes.
now I can't escape, right? So I apologize to this woman. Oh, no, that's okay. And, but I thought about it later. That was the beginning of teaching Megan to lie, to not tell her truth. So I think our belief systems are formed around kind of fudging the truth quite often. And yet every time we do it, we're making a withdrawal from the trust account. And I don't mean financial trust. I mean the trust account in our relationship with the people around us. So learning to be honest without being hurtful is an art and a skill set that really, really effective people develop. And the leaders that I work with, I'm sorry to say this, going into an organization today, the amount of dishonesty is rampant. I mean, it's everywhere. The term that you might have heard going back to your early days, the withholds, that being honest by being silent, being dishonest by being silent is so common, withholding your truth.
Yes, I think what I'm often, as I consult and coach and write on the topics of integrity and trust, I'm fond of an expression about how do we replace guarded and cautious communication with open and honest communication. And I've had the good fortune of working with a few brilliant people, distinguished scientists, distinguished engineers, and these folks are singular in nature. And I'm sure you've worked with some of these types who really are the smartest person at the table. And they often come off in a very unvarnished sense in terms of their expressions. And they preclude the development of trust. And I do believe that, trust can be difficult to earn. It's easy to lose and nearly impossible to regain. Where do you come out on that kind of thinking, Robert, and in terms of a future-looking view to the development of potential?
I believe that for many of us, an overpowering belief is I'm right, and which precludes a deeper look at ourselves and certainly at the effect we have on other people. Mike, I'm a typical consultant. It's almost impossible for me to speak without a flip chart.
Sure.
So we have a limitation here, but if I would ask you and the audience to imagine some concentric circles, and the outer one being our behavior, how we physically behave. The one under that is our emotional body, how we feel. Because that's the most instant trigger to how we behave. And then under that is our thinking body, on our belief system, what we believe to be true about life, about relationships, about work, about everything. In the computer metaphor, it's our operating system. But under that is something you could describe in a lot of ways, but it is, for purposes of today, I'll say, is the authentic you. It's who you really are. And so when I think about authenticity and about building trust, I think about the word integrity, which is, the root of integrity is integer, 1. And when your behavior, your feelings, your thinking, and who you really are aligned, that's when you begin to create trust. Because the expression that comes out of that is pure, it's real, it's you. If on the other hand, you're in business and let's say you have a belief that millennials today are not hard workers. Well, the world you're going to see and the way you're going to communicate is going to be colored by that belief. And until you interrupt it, you're not going to create good relationships with millennials. And I'm really simplifying that statement, but it really does get down to these very practical things. You're going to hire and fire and manage and communicate with people based upon how integrated you are between your physical behavior, your feelings, your belief system, and your essence, who you really are. When you can get those things aligned, then it's not about learning some specific script. It's going to be natural to be really well received and trusted because you're operating in alignment with yourself.
Yes, I mean, I think about integrity in that way as well. It is the real deal. It's an expression is it's of whole cloth. An engineer might describe it as a structural engineer might describe it as things all hang together well. And for me, that is authenticity. That it's what happens when there's congruency between what I say and do, and even better, among what I think, say, and do. Because I think to your earlier point, Robert, in some ways, we've scripted or we've created a time when people can say and do, but not think. And I wonder, to what extent that harms effective leadership. Do you have a view on that?
I sure do. If I generally, I'm introduced to other leaders by current clients, and that's pretty normal. That first meeting for me is always instructive and interesting to me. And so if I say to, my conversations start with a simple question, which is, how's the energy around here? Which is, sounds so simple. It's actually, I've discovered quite a profound question because they don't get asked that question very often. So how's the energy? Since, everything is energy ultimately, and energy is always either expanding or contracting. That's the physics law of the universe. But what we get around to is the questions around focus, alignment, and commitment. That's the framework on which I do my work. And so I'll say, just specifically about your leadership team, let's say it's 10 people or it's up to 20 people. How's the focus? How's the alignment? How's the commitment? And CEOs almost always then rave about it. That, oh, it's great, and I've got the best people, and yeah, they're focused, and of course we're aligned, and look at that poster on the wall, or look at this coffee cup, or whatever, and yeah, they're committed. And then I go out and interview those 20 people, and almost always the CEO was 180 degrees off. He or she has no idea really of where their people are on those key metrics of focus, alignment, and commitment. So the whole team is operating in a space of dishonesty. They're not being real with each other on what they think is the best strategy, on who they think is the best performer, and who's the worst, and who shouldn't be here, and all of these things. I mean, they talk to each other sometimes over a beer, perhaps, but it's not coming out in the meetings. And so that's the issue in organizations. Interestingly, it's also the issue in families. It's the issue in nonprofits in a wildly vivid way. And it's in religions, in most organizations. The ones that figure that out are the superstars. They're the ones that we look at and admire. And quite often we don't know anything about them. I remember 10, 12 years ago, I read about the CEO of Walgreens, the drugstore chain, huge drugstore chain. I apologize, I don't remember his name. And maybe the reason I don't remember his name is nobody remembered his name. The company was operating with incredible integrity, is what you find out. And that he sourced that. He was not charismatic. He was not on the cover of the business magazines. He was not speaking at the big conference. He was running the company with a high level of integrity, and people loved it. And I remember reading that thinking, wow, I want to meet him. except he doesn't meet anybody. He's doing his job. And it's this thing about integrity. He was exactly who he said he was and operated that way.
It's interesting. One of my earliest mentors, Warren Bennis, I think in many ways, Warren fueled the birth of the celebrity CEO in his work. And,
yes.
I think Warren was a complicated guy as well. One of his statements was about leadership was, never has so much been written about so little. And yet, here was a guy who had a number of New York Times bestsellers on leadership. And as you think about CEOs and chief executives, what happens when they're deficient in creating trust, and yet they remain in their organizations? To what extent does that help or hurt an organization when there is this inauthenticity at the top?
It is it's toxic, actually. And I think one of the things in our society that's just fascinating to me is the emphasis on celebrity, including the CEO as celebrity, or even an executive vice president as celebrity, whatever, the top roles. His book on becoming a leader it's an excellent book, actually. And Warren's one of those people I met around the swimming pool at the Instructional Systems Association, and he had an interesting question, by the way. Do you know him personally?
Oh yes, he's an early mentor to me.
Oh, great. At that point, he was using this device when because you see each other once a year at these meetings, and his device was so interesting, and I've used it myself. He says, "What has become more clear to you since we last met?"
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
What a great conversational opening. What has become more clear to you since we last met? But in that book on becoming a leader, he interviews I think it's 100 leaders.
Yes. But
he also interviewed the people that report to them. And I remember that one of the examples was the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
Yes.
When Bernstein was the conductor. And they said, well, they said to one of those, I think it was one of the string players, what makes him such a great leader? And the answer was that was all about trust. He said that he doesn't waste my time. He's not micromanaging me. He assumes that as a professional that I will have rehearsed this piece before I showed up for the orchestra rehearsal. And so he trusts me. And that's what makes him a great leader. And I think that has a wider application, that if leaders surround themselves with the right people, the seats on the bus are filled with the right people, and then they're given a high integrity space with values that they actually practice, and they're aligned around the vision and purpose and values of that company. It's time for the leader to get out of the way, and trust and allow some mistakes to be made and celebrate them. There's a lot of literature on that. People will do what they get acknowledged for. And if effort is acknowledged instead of results, that's a pretty good start for a good relationship and a better company. That if people are doing their best in alignment with the purpose, vision, values of that company, that's a long way toward creating a great organization and really fulfilling the leadership role. I read in, I believe, Forbes magazine years ago, a statement that the only unique role of a leader is the creation, the communication, and the maintenance of an aligned purpose, vision, and values. All else should be delegated. And so I think that's the leader's role. It's not about I just noticed I'm about to do it again, Mike. I spoke before, I spent 2015 through 2020 in China, and I spoke before more than 100,000 people. And what I discovered about myself, and I don't do scripted speeches. I mean, I have an outline of what I want to do, but
you're prepared.
I'm prepared, yes. But I noticed something, and I just had to laugh at myself because I was quoting my ex-wife and Stephen Covey. So, he sold like 25 million copies.
I know Steve well. I knew Steve well as
yeah.
I knew Steve well.
I met him briefly. We spoke together before the World Business Academy group, but and I beat him, by the way. They had ratings and I won. I'm secretly proud. I think I've never revealed that, but at least not publicly. But I find myself quoting them. I quoting my former wife, and some of my friends described my divorce as the divorce from hell. So quoting her is a little bit weird, except she had a special kind of wisdom, and that I learned a lot from. But also quoting Stephen Covey, and he taught in that book that distinction between urgent and important.
Mm-hmm.
And in a practical sense, Mike, I found that for myself in leading my companies and working with my clients, if you can get that distinction and then act from it, that's a really practical, result-oriented behavior. If you can manage your time, your energy, the people around you, am I just responding to the latest fire drill? Or am I really working what's important in terms of our strategy, our execution, our how we treat people, all of the really important things?
In the past, I ran the executive development programs at Marriott International, and Steve, participated monthly in one of our executive development forums, and it was over that period of several years that I had good exposure to him and the ideas, particularly articulated in 7 Habits. And I love what you say as well, as we've thought about truth telling and authenticity, and you talk about success also requires doing the work. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, Robert?
I believe that most of us, I'm certainly talking about myself, I guess indirectly I'm talking about you and some other people we know, who think about management, about leadership, about the human potential and maximizing it in organizations. We can get kind of caught up in thinking and especially how smart we are, and that we've read all the books and we've listened to all the speakers and all of that stuff. I remember that when Gerstner took over IBM years ago, and they asked him a question about a new vision for IBM, and he said, I'm paraphrasing him. He said something like, "We don't need any more visions. We have too many visions around here. We have to execute." And did this marvelous turnaround because he realized he had this incredible asset, just starting with the name IBM, and that they needed to execute on their plans and really pay attention to that. I think having a result orientation is the key to success, because what you're looking at is not the reasons, stories, and excuses, but rather what did we actually accomplish? And again, that's true in any organization, from a family up to Amazon, as an example. That are we executing on what we say we're going to do? And that striving for success is like a mirror for you. That it isn't the success; it's that it's a source of measurement on whether or not we are in fact aligned, focused, committed.
So, many of the entrepreneurs I've been lucky to work with certainly have vision. They bring an enormous amount of vision, maybe even purpose-driven work to fulfill their own ambitions, their singular ambitions, which are unique. And these people end up running companies, end up maybe successfully raising capital based on the strength of their ideas, the disruption that it would cause. And yet, as an organizational leader, you have to make some money in your corporation. You have to make some money in your business if you want it to survive. I mean, it is the thing that's common among all organizations is survival. What happens when that doesn't work out, Robert? And as you said earlier, which I love, is that people can't get out of the way of themselves. What's the board supposed to do with folks like that? I've seen it in clients when they're scaling their organization, when they're going from X in sales and they want to go to Y in sales. And, maybe the founder isn't, she or they aren't the right person to do that. So how do you get to step out of the way in those circumstances?
Are you familiar with EOS, the Entrepreneur's Operating System?
I've heard about it, but couldn't recall any details.
Yeah. For many, many years, of course, running a personal growth company it's cult-like. It's not a cult, but it's cult-like in this way that we had 240 people and plus a bunch of contract people, but 240 full-time people, 70 of these high impact experiential trainers, which is like herding cats, is the expression, and it's true. But, really, really powerful people. If I look at what we did with them, we thought that it was everything. That experience that we were creating in these trainings was all that we needed. But what I learned over time was that when you take that out into corporate work, and, over time, we worked with over 1,000 companies. And some smaller, some medium, some large. We had 14,000 graduates at Chase and 18,000 graduates at Duke Energy. I mean, big involvement with them. Well, if we talk to people about being authentic in that training, or being, in the term we would use, in integrity, but if their meetings are not being run well, or if their structure is confusing, or if there's all these things in running a business that are really, really important, and having a breakthrough personal experience of our training is not enough if they can't go out and apply it. If there are things mechanically almost in the organization that are out of alignment, it defeats what we're doing, and pretty soon they spring back to old behaviors, so that our work is diminished. So one of the things that I did years ago was I read Gino Workman's book, Traction. And I took, as we do in this industry, I borrowed some aspects of it and started including them in the final day of our corporate training work, like how to run a really good meeting, because an awful lot of corporate work revolves around meetings. And his approach, which is very practical and very proven by success, it works. So I borrowed it. Same with evaluating people. He has a very simple way to evaluate people around values, particularly, and results. So my answer to that is to explore getting a coach who is grounded in both transformation, getting people to have a new perspective on life and work and leadership, but also has been there and done that. And this sounds like just self-laudatory, but in that process of learning, I learned what my own personal strength was. Is that, yes, I understand how to assist people in completing their past and telling the truth about current reality, about really developing a compelling vision for their life and the business. Okay, that's what you get from being, behind 1,300,000 graduates. But at the same time, I was running companies, and also had a publishing company. I've been a serial entrepreneur, and I have the disease. But I've also, some spectacular failures, and I've learned from that. But I think people need to get a coach. They need a mentor. They need some wisdom behind them to help them see what they're not seeing, and particularly around their own authentic, highly integrated self as a leader.
I've been thinking about a Nelson Mandela quote for the month of February, which is, "Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." Yes. I think it's just a wonderful way to think about the developing leader, the transformative leader, and what he, she, or they do in terms of driving forward and moving towards authenticity. Robert, it's been an absolute delight for me to be in conversation with you today. And I encourage our audience, our listeners, to learn more about you and the work that you do and have done at therobertwhite.com, to visit your profile on LinkedIn. Robert, if people wanted to get in touch with you, I know those are two ways. Are those the best vehicles and for people to be in touch with you in your work?
They are, and a way to kind of stay in relationship is for the last 12 years, I've done a weekly email called An Extraordinary Minute. Yeah, a bit of timeless wisdom from people like Nelson Mandela, and a couple of thoughts from me, but all designed to be read in 1 minute or less. It's like a little pick-me-up once a week that's distributed by email. So if you go to therobertwhite.com, and there's a resource area there where you can sign up for that. You'll also get a 28-page essay that I've written on success that a lot of people have found valuable. It's free, it's shareable, and it's a pretty good brown bag lunch topic to go through, and people have reported a lot of value from it. But it's a way, you hit reply on any of those emails, you're going to get me. And I read them, I respond to them, most of them. And it's all about relationship. So let's find out if there's something we should be doing together, or just that we can learn from each other.
Again, it's just been an absolute pleasure to be in conversation with you today, Robert, and for our audience to have a glimpse and a moment and a potential connection into your work on transformational leadership. So thank you.
My great pleasure.
I'm just going to remind everyone, you'll be able to find all about Robert in our show notes. There'll be a direction or a pointer to the website. So once again, everyone, thank you so much for listening. And until the next episode of the Authentic Change Podcast with Mike Horn, stay well. Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership, and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change Podcast.